going to return the favor here, and I'm going to basically give you the latest, basically updates on what is really probably the most significant technological revolution in my lifetime, which includes the early internet and the computer revolution, the kind of digital age that brought me to Silicon Valley and Wired Magazine in the early days of the 90s, when we thought that was a big deal and how that was going to fundamentally change things, and ultimately did. But honestly, this is a bigger deal. And so what I'm going to do here in the last 2 years, there's been a story that's evolving here, and what I really want to do is communicate this to you folks in ways that I've been doing this to senior leaders, C-suites, boards, business conferences all over the country, and occasionally through Europe in the last couple of years here too. So giving you that kind of perspective. But what's fascinating to me and why I'm so happy to be here is talking to the farmers, because honestly, you are the most automated industry in the world, and you have pioneered every phase of kind of digital or disruption, you could say, of technological disruption over the last centuries, you could say. And so in some respects, and this is also going to affect you folks, it's going to have a big impact on you, but you actually, I think, are going to ride it a lot better than a lot of the folks who are just starting to wrap their heads around this and have not been used to automation, have not been used to constantly incorporating new technologies into their world. Now, here's the way to think about this is when you hear this thing, generative AI, in the last it was literally only 2 years ago that this OpenAI, a startup in AI, launched ChatGPT. The version was 3.5, technically, for those that are counting. But it's only 2 years ago that opened up and really explained to the world or kind of showed the world what we call generative AI. And I am telling you that move, that kind of development, is probably going to go down in history as really a world historical moment. It really is a big deal, because what it was doing is opening up artificial intelligence, intelligent machines, are opening it up for everyone. What generative AI allows us to do is anyone here, anyone in a company, anyone around the world for that matter, can talk to this immense computing power and to all the data behind that in ways that previously you had to be a top company like Google with software engineers, the highest end software engineers in the world, data scientists behind that, focused with a lot of resources on solving one little thing that can, let's say Google search is one, which was artificial intelligence 20 years ago, but it was you needed an immense amount of resources and brain power to kind of make just a certain focused thing work. And now with generative AI, anyone can talk to that same kind of powerful computing power and the data behind it in ways it's really opening up to everything. Now, it's very similar to what happened to the opening up of the internet in the early to mid 90s, which is what brought me to Silicon Valley at San Francisco to work with the founders of Wired, which was really was the first magazine to kind of get the implications of that, what we call the digital revolution and the internet revolution. And it is the same thing. We had the internet before. The military had used it. Some parts of academia had used it. But it's when we opened it up through the World Wide Web and allowed anyone to kind of use this interactive connectability that exploded in all this popularity and led to all these startups and all the kind of things that have permeated our lives and really kind of transformed the world in the last 25 years. And that is kind of where we're at. So in some ways, what's happening here is we're really crossing the threshold into a new age of AI. And when I say an age, I mean it specifically. Because when you talk about humans crossing into a new age of, let's say, the Bronze Age or the Iron Age or the Digital Age, as we described it 30 years ago in the technology, it means you are crossing a threshold, you are getting a capability, you are getting augmented or taking a step change in our capabilities that we're not going to go back and gonna not use iron, in the Iron Age, or we're not going to not go back and use digital technologies. And so it's worthy to say that from this time on, and I mean centuries hence, humans will be working with intelligent machines. And we have just started that age. We have just crossed the threshold. You can kind of say in the last 2 years, by opening up to everyone. There'd been some early groundwork, which I'm going to talk about later, at how that kind of started. But in general, this has started to get. This is really opening. Very big deal. Now, it's happening primarily right now in San Francisco, in the broader sense, that whole San Francisco region and Silicon Valley. And here's the kind of Star Trek, for those that are Star Trek fans, Star Trek, is rooted in San Francisco 3 centuries in the future, with the Golden Gate Bridge still there. But a lot of times people, it's a boom and bust city. And so San Francisco has been taking a pounding in the media for the last, 5 years ago or so, the last few years in the pandemic, thinking, San Francisco's over, everyone's leaving San Francisco, it's all over. And it's like, for those of us who really understood San Francisco, it was just kind of clearing out from the last booms and the last kind of run-ups of technology and getting ready for what is this really, really big one, which is in artificial intelligence. And so a guy like myself, who has been there for 30 years, when this broke open 2 years ago, the first thing I thought with the generative AI, I said, we got to really bring a meeting of the minds together. We got to basically bring people from all over the region who would know something about technology to really think of, get this series going. And so I basically brought together a series called The AI Age Begins, and we brought together about 250 to 300 tech experts every night around a big question. Not every night, but when we did it, a big question. And I would get about a dozen of the people who are really top experts in the world giving 5-minute answers to these basic questions about basic technology. So for example, one of the first ones we basically did, this was the first one, what are the real implications of generative AI? How big a deal is it? And I kind of gave you a little sense of it just to start, but I'll give you some sense of what happened. So I had here, Adam Chair is the co-founder of the startup Siri, which is anyone who has an Apple phone here. When you talk to Siri, that originally originated in a startup called Siri, of which Adam was co-founder, which was Steve Jobs, before he died, had the vision to see we wanted to buy that company, so they bought it and absorbed it into Apple. And this is at my gathering, this is where I was holding these gatherings. He said, I've been working almost 40 years in AI and more than 30 years in conversational AI, trying to get computers to talk. And I am one of those who say, I never thought I would see what's happened in this last year in my lifetime. This is a common statement. So I'm trying to kind of communicate to you. These are like people who have been in this for a long time. Even they were surprised by this. I'll give you another example here, is Michelle Lee. Now, Michelle Lee had been working at Amazon, essentially, on their AI labs. But before that, she had been actually running the patent office in the United States government. And so she knew a thing or two about innovation or about innovation. That's, by the way, that's me. You can see in the background there, herding the cats here as the host. But basically, she said, even before the announcement of ChatGPT, I was a believer that artificial intelligence is the most transformative technology of our generation. And when she said generation, she literally means our time or our era kind of thing. And I'll give you one last one here, which is an interesting one. This is Jerry Kaplan is generally understood as the first person to create an AI company. It was in 1980, and it went public and all kinds of stuff, and very seen as, at the time, a successful AI company. He also, by the way, invented the tablet that, if you have an iPad now, he was the guy ahead of that actually invented what a tablet was. But anyhow, Jerry said a similar thing at one of my talks here, or one of my gatherings. He said, the truth is generative AI is going to be much more important than any other invention. He had been talking about the wheel and everything else before this. It might be the most important human invention ever. I am genuinely, seriously grateful to have lived to see this moment. I had never expected to see this in my life. Again, another guy, and he's a little older, and so he's in his 70s now, so he could actually, for him it was grateful. The other guy's a little bit younger. And then this final one I just want to say here is Greg Crotto. He's the co-founder of Google, the Google Brain Team. And Google has really been a pioneer in this in huge ways. There's probably a dozen people in the world that know more than this guy about AI. He's also now focusing more on the implications in biotech and healthcare right now in Google, within Google. But he says, I feel like there hasn't been a moment I've been alive that there's been a larger space of possibilities that have just come up over the horizon than have come up in the last year or so. Open field. The impact is going to be on everything. And so that is really what kind of get you, what are the implications? It's a big deal. And so some of the talks we did, or some of the gatherings I had were focused around the positive possibilities, trying to think through, okay, what could we, and I'm going to get to this later in my talk. And then some of the questions was a big question we had was, so what are the real risks, actual risks of AI? Some are overblown. And I'm going to touch a little bit on that in this thing here too. But I'm also going to nestle this a little bit in a bigger idea that I've been working on, which is essentially what I'm calling the Great Progression. This was based on a magazine article that I did right before ChatGPT broke out. So it's 2 years ago, came out, very popular. It's out there. You can Google it, and you can read it, 10,000 word piece. It's now, next year, I'm developing it into a book, and I do a whole series of talks around this. But I want to put this in context, which is because the next 25 years are not just going to be about the flowering, you could say, of AI, but they're actually going to be about 3 world historical technologies. And we're not going to go super depth into it, but we're going to mention them tonight. Today. One is AI. We've talked about that a little bit there. The other is clean energy technologies, which I'm going to talk to you about, why that's so important, and also how you could adapt that in farms, and it's going to all kinds of implications for you guys. I'm going to do it towards the end, quick. And then the third one is bioengineering, which has a lot to do with farming. But there's a whole talk now of our ability to engineer living things in a direct way through genetic engineering and the like. That is now we're capable of doing that. Humans have now figured out that, made that step change. And so what's happening in our era here the next 25 years, for your kids, your kids behind us here, is we're seeing not only an age of AI beginning, but we're also seeing a transition, and we'll get into some of this. It's from largely 100% carbon-based to an increasing kind of chunk of it actually not carbon-based, but also clean, including fusion energy, which we'll chat on briefly. Anyhow, there's a transition going there. And then there's a final thing here on this bioengineering, going from engineering inert things that don't live to now we're engineering directly, well beyond just the cross-fertilization of farming, breeds of plants into directly, basically, engineering life, including plants, animals, and new materials and all kinds of things, including touching ourselves. It's a huge, huge thing. Now, because when you introduce these kind of fundamental changes with new technologies, and there's been a few others alongside these, which we won't go into, we're also going through a period of time here which the systems built around these technologies are changing. The world around, the systems themselves, the way people operate, the way we kind of make the most of these technologies, or we kind of build a society, an economy and society. That's also changing. And so I want to give you a brief, most people, and this is my career too, I'm kind of a late-end boomer here, for the last 40 years we've had a pretty stable system, which has been based on all kinds of subsystems, which we kind of understood and got used to. And that was kind of like the last 40 years, if you think about, our big challenge as Americans or as the West was terrorism. I mean, we had 2 wars in the Middle East, all kinds of stuff. Our energy was 100% carbon. Our transportation was internal combustion engine, for sure. Our culture was dominated by the baby boomers, the biggest generation in American history. Our politics was largely conservative, honestly. A lot of the policies from that, kind of from a classic conservative kind of perspective. Economics was trying to unleash the private sector, deregulate, things like that. Capitalism was all about kind of shareholder value, basically, going to that. Work was 100% physical. Basic production was, like I say, the Industrial Revolution, which we've been used to, and geopolitics was in the Middle East. Why? Because we actually had to keep oil going and kind of keep the whole flywheel going. And so that was essentially what it took, basically, to get the whole thing going. Now, so if you think about what's happening here is that piece is kind of a system we got, but increasingly is going to be migrated from, I would argue, without getting too. And what's happening in each of these other situations, we are essentially watching an emerging new system that over the next 25 years is going to get increasingly clear. There is now a lot of talk, and there's a lot of debate around this, but our kind of meta challenge of climate change. We're watching energy increasingly towards clean. We're going to talk a little bit about that. It's going to be a long transition. Transportation is now we're seeing electric transportation being integrated here. The culture is much more dominated by the children of the boomers, the millennials. We're watching our politics has become, as we're seeing now, kind of more populist, kind of a shift from our traditional way we thought of conservative politics and just what we saw with Trump coming here. Economics, the public sector seems to have a bigger role in it now, including Trump's talking about tariffs and other kind of things. Capitalism is, they're trying to think about all the shareholders or stakeholders in a capitalism. Work, all of a sudden with the pandemic, we got a lot more virtual work going, which we had never done before. Production increasing, it's going to take a longer time, is going to be more biological production, bioengineering, as I mentioned. We're not going to chat much on that. And our geopolitics is now more about Asia, partly because of the rise of China, partly because that makes a big difference for climate change. And so what's happening in our decade here is and this is partly the confusion or the passion and a lot of the things that we're seeing here, is we're watching these kind of systems changing going around us, partly rooted in these technological changes. So that's something to keep in mind here too. Now, what I want to basically do here, I'm going to give you a lot of kind of big picture looks at this, is I'm going to talk about these technological step changes. What does this mean? How does this actually work? Well, here's the thing. Historians of technology, of which I've studied many for a long time, have kind of come up to, believe it or not, about 25 what they call game-changing general purpose technologies. General purpose technologies are a technology that can be applied in many different directions, and that it's not specific to some industry, but it can be applied all of it. Now, the game changers have been like the wheel, the printing press, electricity. I mean, these are huge things that really do change the way humans could do things. They augment us. They give us superpowers. We have a step change in our capabilities, and we're now operating on a different plane. Well, I would argue basically all three of these things I just mentioned to you are in this. They're in this realm. And the one around AI is even its own special thing. Because basically for all of human history up until the Industrial Revolution, maybe 250, 300 years ago, humans, we could augment our physical power by, strapping a plow on a horse and having it pull us. But then we got to where we said, hey, we can create a machine that actually a steam engine that could work like 200 horses, right? And so we started to watch how our augmentation of our physical powers in the Industrial Revolution was like, oh my God, we could do so much more than just the human being alone or occasional animal here. And so here's the thing. So that revolutionized the global economy. And in fact, it led to the world that we're in now, prosperous, wealthy, all kinds of things came out of that explosion of innovation. But here's the deal. Up until now, anything to do with intelligence had to be rooted in a human brain. And intelligence means, can you sense the world around you and how it's changing? Can you make reasonable ideas of what that moving thing is probably going to do? And make a decision around that you're going to act on. That's intelligence. You always needed a human until now. We have machines now that can do all those. And we are just entering this world where humans are now getting greatly augmented. Our mental powers, our intelligence now is going to be amplified by machines. And that is a very, very big deal because think of everything in the world that you can it requires intelligence, and now machines can do an increasing portion of this thing, which is quite mind-blowing when you think about it. But it's happening. Now, what's interesting is these things have these step changes. They come in communication like the printing press back in the day, energy like the discovery of coal that we could, on an industrial level, kind of use coal to charge the base of the Industrial Revolution. Production, like machines, steam engines to kind of power basically factories. I mean, we've been through these things, and you can see how that worked and created the world we know today. But what I'm saying to you is we're now watching all three of those categories. AI, in many respects, you can think of it as communication technology. It can simultaneously translate every language in real time right now. It's happening all over in ways that's knitting the world together in ways we hadn't expected. Instead of studying 20 years to figure out Chinese, you just literally let the computer do it now. Anyhow, it's huge implications. Energies, like I said, we're going to talk more about that. But essentially, here's the thing about energy. Energy, for up until now, energy has always been a commodity. It's something we dig out of the ground, burn, or whatever we do to get energy. Technology is now crossing over into being a technology. And this is a huge difference because once it becomes a technology, you can constantly drive the price down. So the price of solar, the reason it's going down so dramatically is when you roughly double the manufacturing capacity of twice as many solar panels, you basically drop the price about 20%. This is a well-known understanding law, they call it, in manufacturing called Wright's Law. But it's not going to stop here. It's going to keep going down. Same thing with batteries, which we're going to get into later. It's like it's not a commodity that depends what the global market's going to pay. It's actually a technology that's going to get to be dirt cheap. Just like this computer used to be a $30 million supercomputer, and now it's like everybody has it, it costs $500. That's the same technology. Manufacturing drives the price down to crazy levels, which we're going to get a little bit here. So anyhow, what's happening here, and the final thing I just want to say, is in the past we've watched, let's say, the early part of the 20th century rolling out electricity. It took 40 years, and then after the war, the big transformation of the car culture, and we watched the digital revolution that I've been part of for 40 years here with the computer. We're watching now, the next 25 years, we're getting a triple whammy. We're getting 3 of these at the same time, and that's what I call the great progression, because I think it has the potential to be an era of great progress, honestly, is what's going to happen here. Now, what I'm going to do here is give you some foundation here. How did we get here? So first of all, the digital foundation, we've lived it through the last 40 years. We could not have done AI 10 years ago, 30 years ago, 40 years ago. But what we can do is we can lay this foundation here. We had to lay the foundation now to get AI. The first thing we had to do is we had to ramp up the power of these chips. They weren't powerful enough back there. It took 40 years of this. Now, for those outside of tech, maybe you don't know this, but there's a law, we call it, Moore's Law, that every 2 years, engineers are able to basically double the power of chips by getting twice as many circuits, essentially, on a chip. It's a thing called Moore's Law. Now, this has led to an incredible jump in the power of computers. And this is a logarithmic chart there, meaning we're changing the scale of the chart. If this was a normal chart, this would be a skyscraper, meaning we've seen the power of computer chips in the last 40 years just go off the charts. Now, that's one direction. The second thing is, once you do that, you also drop the cost dramatically. So if you go back in that same period of 40 years, 1 gigabyte used to cost $700,000 in 1980. And everybody here, but now it's like a penny, basically. And everybody in this room probably has 300 megabytes, or 300 gigabytes, or 250, whatever it is. In other words, it's dirt cheap from 700,000. So that's what happened, because that's another log chart. It was jumping off the kind of a skyscraper there, you could say. So anyhow, we ramped up the chips. Then we basically had to connect everything to the internet. Like I mentioned, nobody even knew what the internet was in the early 90s, right? And so then we had to go, so if you go back to those days in the 90s when I was at Early Wired magazine, there were only 25 million Americans on the internet in 1995, literally in 1995. And then we said, well, but by 2020, this is my favorite kind of number here, just because the latest numbers are always constantly moving, we got to basically 60% of the planet. And now we're at about 70%, and ultimately this decade, everyone on the planet is going to be connected. And not only everybody, but everything. Everything is now connected to the internet. So we had to get that. We did that. Check. Then we had to basically take data, get it digital. And this is a really interesting one that actually is interesting. It's like you can take all human history. First of all, here's the general. If you keep adding zeros, you can kind of get in from people are used to gigabytes, terabytes. Now we're starting to get into what they call petabytes, exabytes, and zettabytes. So zettabytes, watch the zettabyte thing there, meaning that is an unbelievable amount of information, a zettabyte. So here's where we go, though. All human beings, from the beginning of banging information on clay tablets, all the way to about the year 2000, we've basically created about 5 exabytes. That wasn't even the bottom one, that was the second one up. Exabytes of data. All human, everything we've ever recorded was that much. We are now doing that every 2 days now, because everybody here is generating data and kind of capturing on their phones, and we're putting it in the internet or and things. So it's like a crazy amount of kind of data is being created. And every year, the world's data is doubling. And it's doubling again. So here in 2017, I got basically by 2020, which we passed about 60 zettabytes. That's that lowest one. And ultimately next year, next year, I guess, it's going to be about 175 zettabytes. The point being is that we are now creating insane amounts of data, which is what the AI needed. So we'll get to that in a second. Then we had to get it all up in the cloud. And anyone in business, all businesses were trying to take their data, put it in the cloud so we could interconnect it all. That's what they call the cloud. Essentially, everybody on your phone probably has a similar little cloud experience. And then we needed these prosperous tech companies. And I'll give you one example of how this kind of worked. is Apple computer back in the 90s was dead broke for many years. It was only until the iPhone, which is 2007, that it started to take off. But they became the first trillion-dollar company. There had never been trillion-dollar companies. And then by the year 2020, they were more than a trillion-dollar company. And in fact, not just that, but basically the most valuable companies in the world, the commanding heights of the global economy, were all 5 American tech companies, all West Coast based, 3 of them in the Bay Area, 2 in Seattle. And they all were worth $1 trillion. I mean, basically Facebook is up and down from that. And now, as we know, they're up now, they're 2 trillion, 3 trillion, whatever, it's getting kind of crazy. But the point is, a crazy amount of money they had. And so they were able to pour incredible amount of money into figuring this out. Not the US government, not anyone, it was to figure this stuff out, and now we're ready for AI. Now the reason I'm kind of telling you this is we're ready to rock now. We don't have to build infrastructure for AI. AI is going. Now here, let's go another thing here I want to give you out of AI, because the history of AI. AI, we invented computing in World War II, essentially. And so mainframe computers, the initial computing, we started thinking about AI. We thought there's 2 approaches to AI. How could we get there? One was, well, we could get a bunch of humans to code in every line of code of that is a chair, that is the color blue, that is kind of everything in the world coded in. A crazy ambitious thing, but we figured that's the way computers worked at the time. Another group said, hey, what if we thought about the way we think of kids? Like little kids we don't code kids. Kids just look around at what's going on and they kind of learn just figuring it out. And they said, what if we just had the computers present it with a bunch of data and have them figure out what's going on? Everyone thought that was a crazy kind of thing at the time. So then there were 2 schools. One school, the dominant school, 80% of people were up there. Those are all the kind of top people in MIT and Stanford and all that. And then there was this kind of renegade crew that was in the second tier kind of schools that kind of were like thought of as the outside, like what the nutty people thinking about the computers could teach themselves, until basically about 15 years ago, we had enough powerful computers and we had enough data, and damn if that didn't do it. That was the way we did it. We did it the crazy way. And basically these computers have taught themselves how to talk. They taught themselves what makes sense in the world. And they've done it with humans training it and kind of constantly saying, yes, you're right, no, you're right, not, you're right, that kind of thing. Anyhow, point is, it's a crazy story, honestly, when you think about it. It's a good lesson, though. Don't ever take the crazy person's idea, throw them out, and let them keep working on it, because eventually it might work. And so since that time, I'll just give you an example here. Patents, in that kind of it was about 2014, 15, 16 is when this takeoff. Patents went through the roof around AI. That little dip is the pandemic kind of slowdown of everything. Anyhow, the point is we got a lot of this juice started happening. Now, the second thing I want to say is about this breakthrough. Why is talking such a big deal? Talking, from the beginning of computing, we were trying to make, how could average people make it easy to talk to the computing power, use that power, and talk to the data behind the power. And at first, it took like a priesthood of, software engineers. And I was one of them. Like, I learned how to code all these crazy things. It took punch cards, all kinds of nutty things that average people couldn't do. Anyhow, the point is, it was hard. And then we got to the point where we said, we could get PCs could make little icons. Well, if you clicked on this, it would go do something that'd be useful to someone. And then we got to the web. It was like, well, if you clicked on a link, it would take you someplace and do something. But, someone still had to code it to get you there. And then ultimately we said, well, with mobile apps, well, you could click on a mobile app and it'll do something interesting for the average people. The holy grail has always been voice. It's like, that's how humans communicate. That's how I'm talking to you, right? When you answer questions, you ask, we're not going to text each other. We're just talking. This is what they're going to do. And then, by the way, this is what humans are going to do forever. Jean-Luc Picard in Star Trek Next Generation, what does he do to interact with a computer? He says, computer, do this. Computer, do that. We've crossed this threshold, a Star Trek threshold, you could say, with being able to talk. So those are 2 big computing deals that we had to get through, and we did. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the positive possibilities here of what is happening as we kind of give you this overview of everything happening in this space. Now, technological revolutions go 2 phases. There's 2 stages. One stage, and I'm going to talk to you about cars, that everyone gets how the car revolution worked. And so one stage, you have to build the infrastructure. So with cars, the Model T Ford, 1908 kind of thing. So the early part of the 20th century, we literally had to figure out, well, what is a car, you know? Well, we had to figure out car companies. We had to get a road, start building roads for cars. We had to drill oil, like where do we find the oil? Every neighborhood needed a gas station, so somebody had to open one. And that took like 40 years to create the infrastructure for cars. And it was only after the war, when everyone could get a car, and they say, well, then what can we do when everyone has a car? And then the real explosion of innovation happened around cars, which is, oh, we could build suburbs, oh, we could build malls, oh, we could do fast food, we could do drive-in movies. I mean, everybody else got to do stuff. They didn't know how to make a car work. They didn't have to know how to drill for oil. They just knew how to use the car to go do crazy stuff. And so that changed our lives in really fundamental ways. So this is why I went through this earlier part with you. We have just been through 40 years of laying the foundation of basically what's a computer, what's the internet, what's all that. And now we're able to say the ultimate expression of computers now is what can you do with AI? And so we're going to watch this takeoff of all these things. And I'm going to touch on a couple of them here just to give you a sense. But everybody's going to start going nuts with these things. Basically, there's going to be an entrepreneur taking AI and trying to do something in every field, in every direction, everywhere. It's going to be a kind of that's what happened with the World Wide Web. So anyhow, it's similar like that. So here's one that's going to happen. is we're going to basically see personal assistance for everyone. This is going to happen within the next 2 years here. It's even happening now, if you want to pioneer and a little glitchy. What this means is I've had 3 startups myself. He mentioned it. The first hire I do is an executive assistant. Why? She makes me twice as productive. Basically, I don't have to deal with all the scheduling and figuring out, anyhow, a million things, right? Everyone's going to have that level of things. But it's going to be virtual, and it's going to be dirt cheap. And so what's happening here is these things, I'll give you a little example, these generative AI intellectual levels are getting close to human now. So this was the first generation that 2 years ago when it came out first, ChatGPT 3.5, for those who are counting, you know, the actual AI could pass high school AP psychology or SAT level math. And, you know, like say pass it, they were making it 60%, 70% kind of thing. That was the first version. ChatGPT 4, which came out in March in 2023, it had this huge boost. Everyone was like, oh my gosh. And not only that, but look at this, the bar exam. Basically, it can take the bar exam, which is what humans go through 3 years of law school after being in college. They go to 3 years of law school. And the AI was able to be in the top 90%, meaning there were only 10% of the humans were above the AI. Everybody else was worse than the AI. And this is, again, just that iteration of it. So it's a crazy kind of thing of what's happening, of the kind of ability of these things to actually think. Now, the next thing is you got to get agency, meaning they can go do stuff, like my executive assistant can book an airline flight, can actually set up the call with my colleague, whatever. But that's happening now. That's what's going on now. When you hear agents, that's all what everyone's trying to do, is be smart enough where they can just figure out more complicated stuff like that. And so what's happening now is everybody's going to be surrounded by these PhD level PhD level interns, think of them as, who know everything about anything in any direction you want to go. So if you know something about farming, but you don't know anything about, Iraq politics, you can just ask your assistant for nothing and they'll tell you everything you want to know about it. Anyhow, it's already starting to happen, but think that through. Everyone's going to get more productive. So this is what's starting to happen is we're starting to think, are we actually going to accelerate the entire economy and start to do a lot more with the same amount of people? And this is not a speculative question. It's like top economists are trying to wrap their heads around this thing right now. And I've had many of them in these conversations I've been having. And so here's the thing. Productivity, how much one individual can do, is the holy grail of the economy. Everybody's trying to figure out how do you boost the productivity of the average knowledge worker, the average worker, period. And so this is in America. There was a huge boost in the 50s and 60s. You can see that earlier stuff. And then there was kind of flatline for a while in the 70s, that kind of stuff. Kept going for a little while, and then they flatlined again at the top of the chart here. So anyhow, we know that it's still been going up in general, and we know that when the productivity goes up, basically the whole economy goes up. And this is so that same period of time, this is GDP per person because you can produce more each individual, so you get to share more, everyone gets their pay goes up, all kinds of stuff around that, as well as entrepreneurs make money and all that. So anyhow, that little dip, by the way, is just the pandemic. All these things show that quick hit there. So anyhow, the question that's interesting, though, is we've watched productivity rate with that boom right there. When it went up was the internet boom. We saw it go up quite a bit in the internet boom, which was great, and we had a roaring economy, as you remember, before the whole dot-com crash, all that stuff, or in that kind of early period. But anyhow, the point is, it's been flatlining. But now people are starting to think the last 3 quarters, it's actually gone up substantially. And people are trying to figure out, oh my God, are we starting to see the AI impact? And over the next 5 to 10 years, we could see it really go up. So growing economy where you can sell more food, sell more everything, because it's going to be going. People are going to have more money. So anyhow, the second way to think about this, for anyone who has a kid or grandkids, is if you can have an assistant for everyone, you're going to have a personal tutor for everybody. And so you're going to, because that same person can keep teaching your kid. Now, this is, again, been a holy grail of education forever. And so, but we've never been able to do it because, here's the learning curve. When you have 1 teacher to 30 kids, you can usually get some smart kids, the really smartest kids master it and they get the A's. Middle is all kind of struggling and people in the bottom failing, right? This is what everyone here has gone through that educational system. Now, we have learned if you put any kid, the worst kid or the middle kid, whatever kid, you give them a personal tutor in a human form. Up to now, we needed humans. We've seen this experiments over and over again. They can take any kid and bring them into the top 5% of the class. If you can put a human on them and just say, no, for the 8th time, you got that wrong, and here I'm going to show you another way, from the 8th different way to kind of solve that math problem. Anyhow, we know how that works. And so what's happening here in terms of the opening for the possibility of the whole education is we've watched how we've had this assembly line of education forever where one teacher takes you in 1st grade, does what they can, passes you to the 2nd grade teacher who starts fresh, like, who are you? I don't know anything about you, but let's take you to 2nd grade. Anyhow, you go through this assembly line. Now it's possible that every kid could have an AI who could go home to homework with them, gets to know everything about them, could tell the next teacher, they're great with this, Sally's horrible at that, but she's better at this, whatever. Anyhow, this tutor could go with you through your life, and then ultimately, you could imagine it going beyond that. It's like you're going to have a tutor forever. You'll just keep teaching everything you want to know. Anyhow, it sounds kind of sci-fi, but it is literally, people are absolutely working on this right now. So that's possible. Now, I want to give you a third example here, autonomous vehicles, because this is probably already hitting you guys a little bit, but it's definitely going to hit you guys in a direct way, which is intelligent. To drive a car, you got to be intelligent. I mean, you got to, where am I? What's reasonably going to happen? Making decisions, right? That's that thing. So finally, we got machines that can do that. And so what's interesting is there's a thing there's been engineers that figured out 5 levels of autonomous driving. And to be fair, without going into too much depth here, the first 2 are kind of anyone driving a car now, the machine that can help you with brakes and steering. Those are the first 2 levels. But this third one is what anyone who has a Tesla, it can drive, but you got to have the driver there to grab the wheel in certain situations. That's level 4 is what Waymo, this driverless taxi in San Francisco right now, we're going to talk about in a second here, that it doesn't need anyone. It just drives through San Francisco. It's also in LA now. It's in Phoenix. It's going down to Austin. Anyhow, it's starting to spread. And the final one is it'll just throw the car into any space of North Dakota, never seen North Dakota, whatever, it'll drive fine. This is happening. This is absolutely happening, and it's going to happen in this next 25 years. It'll be all over the place. One of the things that'll probably drive it, which you guys can probably relate to, because I've done a lot of talking to the trucking industry, is nobody can get anyone to drive trucks anymore. And so what's probably going to drive this is long-haul trucking is the first thing that's going to happen, is you're going to basically just move in the interstates. We're just going to have autonomous semis just going boo, doo, doo. And then when you jump into a crowded city, backing it into an alley in New York City or something, yeah, the human will do that. But anyhow, the point is, this is a thing that's rolling. Now, people kind of think about that, oh my God, my wife's one of them, like, how can you basically let a car basically, or a robot or a machine drive you? It's like, that's horrible. How could you do this? It's not safe. Well, I would say, well, compared to what? I mean, basically 42,000 Americans die in car accidents every year. This is the latest numbers I had. And there hasn't been one person died in an autonomous vehicle yet. The Tesla thing's different because that's not fully autonomous. But anyhow, like these in San Francisco here is a common thing now. I mean, it's in fact, I'll give you right now, there's a little video here of my thing. Oops, can I go there? Yeah, that's me, my video from the back of one here in San Francisco. And if you see that video, right in front of it is another Waymo in front of it. They do look a little different. They have, LiDAR detectors and various things. But basically, it's just a normal car. And everybody's driving them now. Anyone can do it, too. Just go there, download the app, boom, it's going. It's now, like I say, they're expanding to other cities, too. The point is, but it's a super safe way to go. Anyhow, long-term story short is, your vehicles, I mean, I understand in some limited spaces you do have vehicles can do that. That's just going to be tractors. That's going to be everything. And it's going to be, and why we do it? Because it's cheaper. It's like instead of paying the Uber guy or whatever, all the stuff we need to do, it's just, and it's safer, and it's all kinds of stuff around it. Anyhow, final thing here I want to get to in terms of the bigger category is the actual risks. There are risks, but I want to get briefly into the actual risks. And because it matters. A lot of them are overblown, and I'm going to make the argument here of why that works. So I did a gathering with all kinds of tech, these kind of experts that I mentioned, and we came up with 10 of them that are kind of on people's minds. And I'm going to briefly just touch on some. For example, they say, well, right now they sometimes get stuff wrong. That's about 5% of the time. It's small. Anyhow, they do occasionally what they call hallucinate. And then there's like, well, sometimes it's biased. Meaning it's been trained on data that's a little racist, or doesn't really think of this or that. That's one thing they say. Well, what about that? It's not so much. Others say, well, but you learn they kind of scrape the internet to train these things, so the old copyright it's not working. Then people say, yeah, they're going to be able to make more misinformation, and it's going to screw up everything, and no one will know what's true. And then other people take a version of that and say, well, it's going to mess up with our elections because you won't necessarily know what's true in the elections. And then people say, well, there's going to be a lot of job losses. I will talk about this in a second. I'm just going to say job losses, transitioning, what are we going to do? Whether the people are going to make a living. Then it's going to be the rich are going to get richer somehow. It's not going to happen, I'm telling you, but I'll go into that in a minute. Meaning, just the social inequity of what, for example, is like rich people have always had tutors. Rich people always have tutors. The only people that are now going to get tutors that never would have had tutors are going to be people who didn't have money. And so anyhow, there's a lot of things that are counterintuitive to this, but it's actually different. Anyhow, there are ideas of security attacks. It'll allow hackers. People say it's going to allow some guy to create a pandemic and we'll all be dead, extinct the whole race. And then everyone, there is a thing of saying, oh, the AI is going to be so powerful and so smart, we'll be like cattle to it and it'll kind of take over and everything else. Anyhow, the point is, without going, I'm going to go very fast through this, but I'll kind of give you a little sense of, those are the kind of, you hear it all the time, you guys maybe heard all versions of that. First three here are basically solvable problems. They're getting solved. In fact, it's getting much more accurate. It's not as biased. It's just fine-tuning a new technology. This thing happens. We're going to figure out how to compensate the right copyright. That's all getting worked out right now. Anyhow, that's a thing that I'm not too worried about. I mean, we could debate it later if we had more time. These ones are essentially not that different from what we've had with social media. It's just going to make it easier, but it's not like fundamentally a different risk in kind. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time in that because a lot of people talk about that in social media. This one, though, I want to chat a little bit about because that's the one that people always think about and get worried about. And you guys, interesting farmers, are the greatest example of why not to worry about this, and I'm going to say why in a second here. Because here's the deal. What's happening now is this is the prices of everything since roughly the late 90s. And the things that went up, what's common to those? Every one of those has to do because it took expensive labor to teach at college, to basically provide childcare for that matter, medical care. Everything's gone up. Why? Because we could not automate it. There was no way to automate those jobs. There was no way to make them more productive with technology. Everything that could be automated, look at below, particularly products, went down in price. I mean, TVs are dirt cheap now, right? New cars are about the same. Anyhow, so this is the difference. Everything to do with intelligence is now going to essentially be able to incorporate this technology, and those are going to drive the prices down. So it's going to make education more affordable. It's going to actually make healthcare more affordable. Anyhow, a bunch of ways to talk about that. So that's a very big deal, but it's like who's going to get hit? It's not going to be people of labor, all kinds of stuff. So that's another one. Here, I want to show you this next slide. This is coming from Goldman Sachs. This is showing the different categories that are probably going to get hit first with displacement. And to be fair, just to jump to the chase here, the gray ones are the only ones that are probably going to lose jobs right away. That's the executive assistants, which I just told you, and legal, because a lot of the jobs of the low-level legal people are going to be, AI is actually already doing it better. So there is going to be some job losses. But most of those blue ones are simply going to make us more productive. They're going to actually make us do twice as much work, or half again as much. And the red ones there are ones that have to do with physicality, which is in your world, you're a little different with farming, but basically like maintenance or construction or various things. We don't have robots, are not going to be there for another 5 years, 10 years. So anyhow, for a while, we don't have to worry about robots. Anyhow, the point is, this transition is one thing like that. And I will just say, you guys, I use you as an example all over the world, or when I talk about this thing, which is, you are a great example of what happens when 90%, almost 90% of all Americans in 1800, the beginning of the country, were farmers, right? And through all the successive waves of technological changes, you folks have adapted to the point where there's only 1% of you feeds all of America, and you have excess, you feed big chunks of the world. That's an insane amount of productivity from one or two people, or from a small percentage of people. And you're going to keep doing it. But I'm saying, what happened? Was there mass unemployment around the United States? Was everyone kind of in trouble? No, go around. Every restaurant needs somebody. Everybody's screaming for work. The unemployment rate is the lowest it's been in 50 years right now. Anyhow, the point is, this doesn't translate to mass unemployment and can be managed for sure. And then the final one I just want to do here is these crazy ass risks, like, are we all going to die? No, we're not all going to die. And really, the AI experts I talk about, particularly that top category of AI will be smarter than us, there is a category of characters that talks like that. But the mass majority of people I say is, that's not going to happen if it is ever going to happen, it'll be 100 years in the future, or 50 years in the future. We got plenty of time to worry about that. The other one is bad guys are going to be able to do bad stuff with this, whether it's security, attacking corporations, or meaning, their firewalls, or extinction, like making bad stuff happen. I don't think extinction level, but there's going to be bad stuff going on. But again, the U.S. military, I've been working with DARPA, a bunch of folks are already all on the case here. So anyhow, these are things. Now, why am I jumping? Oh, one thing I will just point out to you is when people talk about risk, remember, can you see that? I need that slide up. They talk about, listen to who's saying it. Because I'll tell you who's saying it. Many of the people saying this are people who are rooted in big tech, meaning these big 5 companies. Because honestly, if you put onerous regulation on anybody, the only people who are going to be able to pay the lawyers, pay the kind of, the copyright law, kind of paying every little person on the internet who ever wrote anything, the only people who are going to do it are the biggies. And so the startups are screaming bloody murder not to do this because they know they can't live up to that regulation. So this is just one little example. Just last year, 2023, this is the estimated number of startups that the big 5 bought. We don't know for sure because a lot of them you can't really tell. But I mean, just put it in perspective, like, Apple itself had 35, startups it bought. Now, so the point is, the startups aren't the ones screaming for regulation. It's the ones that have the ability to deal with it. Anyhow, final thing. So what's happening here, I want to just say to kind of bring us into alignment here, is we're going into a narrative struggle around AI here that's going to matter. And I want to just tell you how this, and I'll give you one example, a snapshot here. Here's another kind of chart, and I'm giving you a lot of charts here because I find, just don't listen to me, but look at these numbers. So here's interesting polling. Around the world, the people who think, will artificial intelligence help or harm people in the next 20 years? Basically, the green is, it's going to be great. And who's up there? Japan, who's got a lot of robots already. China, Germany, anyhow, there's things. Where's the U.S.? We're kind of down there. Why are we there? And then there's the kind of people who don't know. Basically, that's the middle. And that's a lot of people who don't know, so give credit. But then these are people that think it's going to be bad, harm people. And look at the United States. We've basically got about half and half with a lot of people, basically middle in the middle, a lot of people in the middle there. Meaning, no, they're scared, basically. They're like, no. Now, this is a big problem because we're on this world-transforming technology, and if we shut it down or slow it down, it's going to be a problem. So here's what I would just say. Every single general purpose technology comes in the world with risk. And electricity, you're going to touch a wire, damn, you're going to die. Anyhow, the point is, what we learn, more things come good out of it, than bad. Let's say it's a 60-40 thing. And so we say, okay, we're going to put a lot of energy into lowering the risk. And so a lot of people think, okay, great, I'm going to make a company that's just about lowering the risk of that thing. And then ultimately we get to the point where we even institutionalize it. So for example, even fire was a problem, right? But now every neighborhood in the world has a fire engine, right? It has a fire. Why? Because, yeah, it's a risk, but we're not going to stop fire, right? And so the thing is, we're on that path. There was a talk when the first humans were finally figured out how to grab fire, and some guy went and grabbed a log and burned his hand and said, let's put this fire out. This is stupid. Why are we going to do fire? And the guy, they're on the group, they say, well, it's doing great and wonders for this raw meat. Honestly, it tastes a lot better with the cooking it. And somebody says it's keeping the wolves away. That's good. And it's a lot warmer at night around this thing. We'll figure out how to deal with fire, right? I mean, that's just the conversation human had. The same thing with electricity. Electricity, they say, wow, that wire is going to kill somebody. If you touch it, it's going to kill somebody, And they say, yeah, but it's lighting our house and, lighting the dark and lighting this thing called a radio. I mean, damn, seems good. We'll figure it out. And of course we did. We got code. We got everything. Every room in the world now is safely wired, right? We're going to do the same thing now, is what I'm saying, with AI. We are having these conversations. Some are freaked out, some not. But we are doing it. And here, I'll give you this last quote here from the AI section here. It's from this Greg Crotto, co-founder of Google Brain, probably about top dozen guys in the world almost on this stuff. And he said, we have to try. We were talking about the risks when he was talking about this. It would be insane to look at this kind of technology, this kind of opportunity, and say, well, I'm too scared. And so he was calling on the people in that room, which is 250, 300 people. So please try. And I say the same thing to you. We've got to go forward with this. I mean, that's just what America does. Now, I'm going to shift gears here, given we have a little more time, and touch on just the two, and I'll circle a little bit back in the very end here maybe to AI, but I want to just also shift to these other two things briefly that are going to in fact impact you guys in terms of energy and bioengineering a bit. And I'm saying it, and I think it's just worth saying. And I also got to say something, without wading into too much of it, but you cannot talk about the next 25 years without taking into context that climate change and how that's going to affect various things, including AI. Now, so what I want to just say here is just a few things here, and is that there is clearly, we've seen carbon in the atmosphere started basic in the Industrial Revolution. This is from the time of Jesus, kind of 2,000 years, it went up like that. It's going up. We know that, and that's what traps heat in the planet. We also know as long as humans have been walking on the planet, which is Homo sapiens, our brain, our body, came around about 300,000 years ago. And so if you look at that number, we've never lived in a time with this much CO2 in the atmosphere. Those ups and downs are the natural rhythm of ice ages and others. There is a natural rhythm to CO2, but clearly Industrial Revolution punched it up higher. So this is a thing that's kind of happened, and you can have debates on it and how important that is. But I will say it is driving a lot of the conversation that's going to shape your industry. So anyhow, and this is what regions of the world have been putting it up from the beginning, the early industrialized to recently, which has been China and the developing company. And what's interesting about this is how we have now flatlined and are bringing it down. So this is the thing, a success story about America and out the West, is that we are putting about as much CO2 in the atmosphere as we did in the 70s with a much bigger economy. So we now know how to do this. We can be much more efficient with the energy. We can drive down these things. And also natural gas, which you guys are also tied into, much cleaner than coal. We're phasing out coal quicker, all that kind of stuff. Again, I don't want to get huge into it, but I want to give you the broad strokes of this, because what's happened, so this is why everyone's trying to figure out how do we bring it down. And that's probably not going to go away for the next 25 years. Anyhow, what was fascinating, I want to give you this update on clean energies. Clean energies are hitting these tipping points. And it's really worth knowing this from outside the tech world. And because here's the thing again. If energy becomes a technology like it is with solar panels, and we're going to talk about it, you can drive the cost down, insanely down. I mean, a lot. And we're just starting to see the beginning of this. So here's what's happened with the cost of solar panels since the 70s when it was experimental and hugely expensive. And so since 1980, there we go. Since 1980, even then, it's come down about 100%. Or no, since the 70s. So we've watched the price of the solar modules go down for that. We have watched just in the last 10 years here, the cost of solar for installing a new utility with solar has become dramatically dropped in price. It's come down about 90% in 10 years. And this is what they call levelized cost of energy, meaning what it costs for the entire lifetime of that energy plant from building it, but also you don't have to put any more money into it. Once you set it up, for 30 to 40 years, solar will just keep producing. A little maintenance. But you don't have to keep putting natural gas and coal and oil and all the stuff we have to do to keep the other stuff going. So it has become, by far, the cheapest energy for a lot of regions of the world and in the country. And the problem is, it's going to keep getting cheaper. It's going to keep getting cheaper, a lot cheaper, as we scale. And so what's happening is you're watching this hockey stick take off, which is what happened with the digital technologies. Once this is understood, people are starting to watch, holy shit, we're on this ride now. And so that is what's happening. You're watching, there is a talk about nuclear energy also doesn't put out carbon. But look at what happened with nuclear. It stalled out, and I'm not proud of that. I think we wish we would have developed nuclear. But the point is, right now, it's stagnating. Whereas if you that's the combined solar and wind combined, now it's passing. We are producing more. This is globally, by the way. We are producing more. Or no, is this global? Anyhow, we're producing more in wind and solar now than we are in nuclear. Yeah, this is global. And World Energy Report. And where would you go? Where would you bet the money is going to go? It's going to go to the one going up, which is what's happening. And so there are some key pieces here, which this was if we could get to 100% electric by 2035. There was this idea of what they call the Inflation Reduction Act, which is really, as we know, $350 billion stimulus through the Biden administration to kind of beef up and accelerate this. That's government money. But here's the point, folks, which is actually allowing us to hit that goals. That's the blue that we're thinking we get hit. But here's the thing. Follow the money. This is private money. It's over $1 trillion of private money now is going into it. The whole global finance is seeing this as that's where to make money now. And so those numbers there, that red is the kind of money going into solar, and the green is electric vehicles, which we're going to get to in a second. And then so I'm saying the money's now starting to go. And so you're watching this thing. Now, the final little thing I'll just say here, I don't have time to go into it too much, but there is also, because of AI, we are now thinking problems in energy that we never thought we could solve. Just like I told you, people said that they never thought they'd see a talking computer. They're now starting to think, oh my God, we could probably use AI to solve what is the holy grail of energy, is to create nuclear energy the way the sun does, which is fusion, not fission, not nuclear fission, which blows stuff up and has a lot of waste products. But nuclear fusion is you fuse them together, super safe, super possible, abundant, much more powerful. It's getting within reach now, and people are now starting to think we could maybe get that by 2030s. So yeah, that's one thing I just want to say with energy. Probably wouldn't affect you guys, but to know that AI is now opening up these things. And I want to do the final thing on electric. Again, just trying to put it in context here, for how you could literally use it, but also how it might affect the markets you're dealing with, is electric mobility is doing the same thing. Because electric mobility is a technology. It's not a commodity. And so what has happened, these are the numbers of lithium batteries coming down. They've gone 100%, they've dropped in 30 years. So you're watching that happening. And so what are you seeing? You're watching globally, it's taking off electric vehicles. This 17% of all new car sales in the world are 100% electric, not hybrid. 17%. We get a distortion here in the United States because we don't see this. But I just want to give you the whole picture here, since you guys are global thinkers in terms of your farming and all. We are hitting about 9%. A lot of this, to be fair, is in California is like 25% of new car sales are electric now. And so, but anyhow, the point is, nationally, it's already hitting 9. But still, you think, okay, is that good or bad? And people are saying, yeah, I don't think it's going to work. But let me tell you, it's working all over the world. So here's regionally over the world. that went Norway, which is also a cold and oil-producing place. They are now about 90% of all their new cars are 100% electric. In 10 years, they made the shift. If you look at these other ones, Sweden, all those kind of, Google, the Northern Europeans are doing it. But China's at about 25%, their whole country. Actually, it's pushing close to 40. They think they could get to 40. Anyhow, the world is doing this. And where are we? We're banging around down there with Japan and India. We're not leading the world on this. And this matters because this is probably what's going to happen. As those prices go down and down and down, you're going to see certain China and Europe are poised to take advantage of the global car market. We may catch up here. We'll have to see. But that is going to projections that they're starting to think out to about 2040. But here's the thing, folks. I'm old enough to remember when our auto industry did not adapt in the 70s with the oil crunch. These Japanese came in with these little dirt cheap cars, small cars, and everyone said, that's not for GM, that's not for Ford. And of course, it became Toyota and took over the entire market. This is what's happening globally now with China. One of the reasons you talk about tariffs that are going to affect you folks, why do we have tariffs on Chinese cars right now, electric cars? Because they already are dirt cheap. You can get a kick-ass car like a Tesla for about $20,000 now. So what we're doing, we have to put a tariff up so they don't bring those in, so they kill our domestic electric vehicle thing. So this is a serious thing. So, all right, I'm going to shift one last time, just a tad, to mention, because you're in the farming, but to just tell you how fast the pricing is falling in this field too, bioengineering. So this is another. So we had this breakthrough to basically crack, meaning understand, decipher the first human genome, which is what is our genome of our DNA. It took 15 years and about $3 billion to do it, and we finally did it by 2003. Since that time, so think of that, $3 billion, 15 years. Since that time, it has dropped to basically $1,000. By 2020, it was $1,000, and now it's about $200, and it's going to be basically $50 this decade. So the Moore's Law thing I was saying to you about, how the doubling, and also dropping the cost, cutting the cost in half, that was Moore's Law. This is twice as fast as Moore's Law. Meaning, we now know we can basically genetically, anything. We can just figure the genome up for nothing. It helped in the pandemic and other things. But anyhow, this is huge breakthroughs. And the second breakthrough, which again, in your field, maybe you guys know more about this than I know, but the other one is we've figured out to cheaply and easily engineer the genes. This is what this thing called CRISPR, which was a breakthrough in 2014, 2015. Oops, can I get the slide here? But 2014, 2015, we got a breakthrough called CRISPR, cheaply, easily genetically engineer. She's from UC Berkeley, Jennifer Doudna. She won a Nobel Prize for it. But anyhow, this is kind of investments coming from biotech. Once biotech realized, oh my God, we know how to do this, they started making investments from VCs. This is just a proxy of what's probably coming this decade. So this is a little bit behind. It's not going to be at the same pace of what's happening in energy or, for that matter, with AI. But I will say that we're entering a world of synthetic biology, meaning a biology up to now, except for you farmers kind of crossbreeding and figuring out how to do it, trial and error over generations of plants or animals, we haven't really been able to engineer life directly, but now we can. And so that's when you hear this word synthetic biology, it means humans are now going to engineer living things. And it's going to make new materials, it's going to make competitors to plastics are now going to be biodegradable kind of when they're exposed to sunlight or salt water in the ocean for 2 weeks or something. Anyhow, there's all kinds of companies working on this stuff. So anyhow, this can take a little more time, but it's going to definitely be something interesting over time. So I'm going to wind up here with bringing it back to AI and this bigger thing, which is, this isn't just happening in the United States here, folks. This is a world historic moment for everybody on the planet. And so the biggest superpower next to us is the Chinese. And he had mentioned, by the way, I was a foreign correspondent in China. I was in Tiananmen Square, which was their big, for those that remember that, was the big crackdown on student protesters. I was working for Newsweek then. This is Shanghai. This is across from old Shanghai. This did not exist when I was a foreign correspondent there in the late 80s. This didn't exist. It was flat. And this is just overnight. In fact, it looks even different now. Point is, the crazy stuff that the Chinese have done, they've gone from a basket case country, literally with 800 million peasants on $2 a day, living on $2 to kind of this crazy superpower. So yeah, that's this big enough thing. But when it comes to AI, there's really only two superpowers. It's AI, it's America and Chinese. And I would say we're about 10 years ahead, roughly, but they are coming up strong. And so what's happening here is we've watched this whole battle between democracies and autocracies or totalitarian outfits. This is literally from the beginning of the United States, is we were the only democracy, right? So everybody was an authoritarian, totalitarian thing. And then we've kind of, moved our way up and helped expand this since Reagan and all that, and the fall of the Berlin Wall. We've kind of gotten into, pretty good, more democracies out there than not. But anyhow, there's still that battle going on around the world. And so right now, China is driving it. And so what we're watching is a battle now. They came into the supercomputer. This is a proxy for AI. They came into the supercomputer race about, 15 years ago. Yeah, exactly around the time of those breakthroughs of the tech I mentioned to you, which is 2014, 2015, 2016. They realized, oh my God, AI is here. So they've been boosting that. So this is supercomputers. They've also been developing chips. And so they've been trying to steal a chunk of the global chip manufacturing. And you're hearing that in the news about kind of we're trying to stop them from catching up by not giving them certain kinds of technology to get them there. Anyhow, this is a battle going back and forth. And here's a complicated one, but it's what I just was playing with. This is the brain power in AI. And it's a little complicated, but let me walk you through it. Meaning right now, if you go to that bottom layer, who in undergrad is studying AI? The red is Chinese. These are U.S. and these are U.S. citizens, like U.S. citizens, Chinese citizens, European citizens. But when you get to grad school, a lot of Chinese and a lot of Europeans, they come to the U.S. So we have the biggest in the grad school level, right? Boom. More people working on AI, which is one of the reasons we're on the front end here. And then we go to the next postdoc, which is the highest level of it. We still have the lion's share, but some of those that are coming from the U.S. are going back. You see those little channels are going back to China too. And then Europe and them is holding their own there. But I'm saying this is going to be, so we're watching the potential of the next 25 years is a fascinating kind of debate now, which is why opening immigration to high-end, particularly people who know something about AI would be a good thing as rather a bad thing. And whatever you think about immigration, I don't know, it probably affects farming too. But anyhow, the point is, this is a global thing going on. And it matters because here's where we are, folks. If you do AI the Chinese way, there's an authoritarian top-down. They could watch and control everybody. It's going to be a crazy ability that AI allow them to do, a few folks at the top. The American way, kind of more crazy ass, but it's kind of a bottom-up thing. It gets nuttier. It's going to have crazy stuff. It's going to have wild debates, the whole thing. But it's, I think, a better way to go, and that's a way that we want, essentially, the world to go. And so what I'm going to say here is set aside the possibility of an emerging Cold War with China. But I would say, I'm going to go back to my big theme to wrap up the whole talk here, which is we are entering, in my opinion, an era of great progress, a great era of great potential. We are literally on the verge of some amazing period here, I had to argue. We are literally watching the beginning years of nothing short as a kind of a new age of AI. It's beginning. What a heady time. This will be the dumbest AI we are ever going to interact with. It's going to get better next year, and your kids are going to have it better, and blah, blah, blah. Anyhow, it's like we're entering a new age of that. We're also entering a new age of technology, of kind of clean energy technology, which is going to have a broad implications. There'll be a long transition for those that are concerned about, all the different carbon ways that we're going to still need for a long time to come. But the point is, we're on a journey that's going to make a huge difference to make a sustainable planet. And ultimately, we're on this beginning of engineering life in ways we could reproduce and produce things that for up until now we've always had to do through dirty, polluting industrial processes. It is a crazy thing. And because of that, this world, I really do believe that we've kind of grown up with, and a lot of you are in my kind of category of age now, is increasingly going to be less potent, and we're going to see kind of the evolution away from a lot of that. But we're going to come into another kind of era where all these things I think are going to work. They're going to come together in ways that I think are going to give us real possibility and make our kids and grandkids more authentic. I mean, a way to thrive for a long term here. And I will say 50, 100, 1,000 years from now, people are going to look back at this period, the early 21st century, or kind of where we are here, and they're going to say, damn, that is when humans figured out artificial intelligence. I mean, they began this journey. Crazy time. What an amazing thing that they figured that out. And then they're going to say, and they also figured out how to basically transition from carbon energy, which was, causing this kind of climate problem. But they got a handle on it. They transitioned to a kind of much cleaner way, which we can have clean, abundant, crazy amounts of energy and not worry about any kind of collateral damage to the planet. And ultimately, they're going to say, and that's when they figured out how to bioengineer life in ways that improved healthcare, improved kind of the environment, improved all kinds of ways to make us much more in sync with the planet. And they say, wouldn't that have been an amazing thing to have been living in that time of the great progression, to be part of that journey where people are actually part of an incredible possibilities. And with that, I would say to you folks, you're here, it's now, we are in the middle of this thing, or the beginning of this thing, and let's all do what we can to make the most of it and really pull this off for ourselves, for our kids, and for their kids as well. And with that, I'm going to say thank you and have a great conference. It looks like we have a little time for some questions.
We have some time for questions. So go to a mic if you want to ask a question.
Could you put my slides up? I just want to throw up one thing about how people can stay in touch too. That is, by the way, my website and my company's website, just so you can get a lot more of this kind of stuff. And here's the one I really want to tell you is I'm in Substack, which is, for those that might know Substack, I'm writing a thing called The Great Progression, which is the basis of a book I'm writing on the Great Progression, and that'll talk to you all about what I'm telling here on the AI Age Begins. It's just Google it, find it there, and happy to go. Anyhow, open to any questions.
Open to questions. We're at.
Howdy, howdy. Can you hear me?
Yeah, we got you.
So I'm curious about.
Okay.
I'm curious about AI and bioengineering working together.
Yeah.
And currently I read about how they're employing AI to identify cancers early, for example.
Yeah.
Do you foresee a day in the future where AI, bioengineering, will cure diseases like cancer? Totally. And if so, how far out is that so I can start smoking or something right now?
Good question. Here's what I'll tell you. AI is going to accelerate innovation in every single direction. And bio is the one that is hitting fastest, healthcare right now. Without getting too deep into the weeds here, there's a whole problem of once we understand the genes, genes are essentially translate into proteins. Like they tell us what proteins that make up the cells in our body. And humans have struggled for 50 years to figure out what they call the protein folding problem, which is essentially when that gene says that's going to create that protein, what is the shape of the protein that it takes form in your body? And humans haven't been able to figure this out. They put the same deep mind that essentially was the core, Google's core kind of what they call deep mind AI technology. They put it on this problem with the data set that basically humans have been struggling with for 50 years. And it figured out every single protein. It basically figured out what it was going to look like, every one of them. It took what we knew from the few that we had cracked that would take years to crack. It figured out what the code was and how to figure it out. Oh, and once we do that, they just went through everything. So now every single protein that we know in the world, we understand the shape and how it comes out of how the gene, what's it going to express. That thing is just mind-blowing. And so because of that, we're able to actually start dealing with cancer and all kinds of things now. They're starting to think, oh my God. So that they can kind of figure out the genetic disposition of every person. Oh, you are going to have this problem with cancer. Oh, why are you going to do that? Because it can't produce this protein. Oh, we can actually help you produce that protein. We can slip that into the system here so you will produce that protein. Anyhow, it's just all kinds of things that are just revolutionizing bio. That's why that Google Brain, the co-founder of Google Brain, what does he focus on? He's focused on healthcare and bioengineering because it is the space that is the most complex challenges that are in biology. And now AI allows us to deal with the complexity in a way that we've never thought about before. And so, yes, it's going to absolutely transform healthcare in our lifetime, like now. It's going to start happening in the next 10 years here. It's a really exciting thing. Go ahead, you got a question here?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let me last thing. The one problem about that, because you alluded to it being a bad thing, it also is going to cause problems. So let me be clear with that. My last event I did this summer in San Francisco, I had the new head of the DARPA, the Defense Advanced Research Project, which develops all our advanced kind of weaponry and thinking on things like that. He is the new head of biotechnologies for DARPA. He came all the way from Washington to come to my event. And while he was there, he met 4 people of my speakers he's now given money to, because the defense world is trying to figure out how someone could manufacture through these technologies a virus or that could cause a pandemic or something that would slip past our immune systems. And so they need to know how to be ready for that and counter it. So there is a kind of a cat and mouse thing going here. And so the military is all over this now, because there is a downside of this. And as much as but again, there's all this positive. Do we really want to walk away from solving cancer just because some nutcase is going to try to spin up a pandemic? You know, we got to figure out how to deal with it different ways. Anyhow, that's a long answer, but go ahead.
Roger.
Yeah, it's kind of a twofold question. Out here in rural America, we don't have paved roads and concrete and all this stuff like I noticed in a lot of your pictures. We've got dirt roads, we've got gravel roads, but we also have livestock.
Yeah.
And I never heard much about common sense. And I'm just curious how that's going to fit in with this AI. I understand the technology part of it, what you're promoting, but the common sense part is escaping me, because some of this stuff, dead of winter, we got a storm. You're not going anywhere. How are you going to tell that AI car that, maybe you should stay in the garage?
Good point. I mean, we're in the early days here. Let me be clear. Well, I'll tell you one thing. Autonomous cars cannot and do not operate in any place around snow. They're not even allowed legally to do that for those reasons. I mean, it's used to understanding the environment, seeing it in different ways. If it's covered with snow, it won't know how to do that. So there are barriers, and it's going to be a while. But it's also kind of going to be a solvable problem, I would say, with time, particularly since they're using LiDAR and all kinds of stuff that sees through snow and all kinds of things. So, but I hear you. The more general way you're trying to say is the common sense. I think it's going to take a real adjustment. I think America is. So I'm just talking purely the technology, and I've tried to, or as much as I can, the technology and where it's probably going to go. And by the way, once the technology comes out, if we shut it down here, but let me put it this way: Europe is already shutting down its AI because it is scared of what's going on. And they are saying we don't want to develop this, or they're putting onerous regulations on it so that, to do it. And what is happening? They're destroying their internal AI industry, and all their most promising startups and stuff are all coming to the valley here, coming to the U.S. This is going to happen wherever, through whatever region of the world is going to do it. So there is a level of we kind of have to know what the technology is doing and how to get involved, and so that's. The second thing, though, is we as a people in America have to come together, I would say, and to really figure out how can we make the most of these in ways that work better for everybody, for urban, but rural, for red state, blue state is the language we talk about now, for all kinds of the ways that have we've been feeling divided and kind of stressed out. But I would say this about this, and I do a whole talk on the Great Progression, which uses elements of this, but is essentially its own story. And one of the things I go over is American history has been, it's an uncanny look at American history. It's about every 40 years America reinvents itself, is one way to think about it. And there's key ones we all know about after the Civil War, after World War II. I mean, there's ones that are just obvious, but every 40 years, and then I would say 40 years ago, kind of the Reagan Revolution, there was one to kind of reconstitute what America was about. Anyhow, we go through these reinventions, and around those reinventions, we recalibrate who we are, and we come together in different ways, and particularly generational change, a bunch of stuff happens. But I will say we're on the cusp of another one of those, I would say. A much more fundamental reinvention of America is going to come out of this, I think, and I think in good ways. I think it's going to knit the country together. I mean, I was talking on radio to a couple of your radio stations here. It's like AI's putting all the data centers. They're coming to North Dakota. Why? It's cold. It's like heating is the biggest problem with these data centers, which are running these chips. It's super hot, And so if you put them in California, they're overheating and it takes a ton of energy to keep them down. So they're literally moving them here. And anyhow, there's going to be knitting together this country in a way that, again, this next generation of energy is going to basically, Texas, I'll say, out of the red state, blue state issue, Texas has installed more solar and more windmills than California in the last 3 years, which is kind of the blue state that's kind of doing a lot of it. I mean, these technologies are not, they don't know one side or the other. It's kind of, it's happening. And I think we can come together in new ways, in ways that I think the recent politics doesn't show that, because we haven't really understood what's possible now. And I'm saying I think we're starting to watch a new thing happening, and I'm an optimist, but I think it's going to actually roll out in good ways. So common sense, American common sense to these new technologies will do what American common sense did to the aviation revolution, or the car revolution, or to the electric revolution, or we've been through these over and over and over, the steam engine revolution. We've kind of led in all these, so let's just keep leading. And every one of those led to a different kind of America, spread prosperity, and made us all kind of move the ball. I think we can get back there. But we can talk about that over drinks or something today.
Just to follow up though, when COVID hit, prior to that we kept hearing about how agriculture, livestock, and everything was polluting everything. When they shut the world down, they had pictures from the space station before and after. Before, you had cloudy Hong Kong, you had cloudy New York, etc., or smoggy, I should say. A few days after they shut everything down, everything was crystal blue skies.
Yeah.
Farmers were still farming, cows were still farting. Yeah. Life was going on. So my concern is agriculture's been getting hit by pollution claims that I don't think are accurate. Are they going to get that straightened out?
I think so. I mean, I think a lot of people are realizing that agriculture can sink a lot of, I mean, even people that are pushing hard on the climate stuff see agriculture as a way that actually can work in sync with this. So I believe that, let me put it this way. The last 10 or 20 years of kind of tension between what's been going on in this country, in my opinion, is more rooted in we were watching the old system not adequately working, and so everybody was angry and kind of stressed out and trying to various things. I'm thinking there is a new beginning here that could start in a way that's going to actually knit it back together. And one of the things that America has been great about is new technologies, pioneering new technologies. And the second thing is, particularly in competition against China, I think there's going to be another knitting together of this country, because we're going to see, everybody's going to see that there's a bigger challenge out there. It's not internally, it's actually external. And I think it's going to be a positive thing in a way for this next country. If you, again, I'm going to be talking about this in my book and also in this other series on Substack if you want to follow a lot of this stuff. Go ahead.
We'll go to C, and that'll be last questions. Go ahead.
Okay. I was just wondering if you would speak to the philosophical conundrum that AI presents. In particular, I was thinking about Dr. Dennis Cooley from NDSU was on a recent radio program, and he talked about death bots and how AI could bring someone who had passed away, bring them back to their loved one, so their loved one could have the company of that person and so forth. And how do we reconcile what we're doing to people with artificial intelligence, I guess?
Well, you've touched on one of a bazillion things that's going to basically we're going to have to think through. That capability that you're talking about is absolutely able to do it. I'll tell you just two quick things. You could. I'm doing a funny thing. I mentioned that my mother still lives in the Twin Cities in Minnesota, right? In the house I grew up in. And one of the things I'm doing is I'm interviewing her over video, basically from San Francisco, and I'm just every little aspect of her life, and also the history of that family that we're gonna be lost because all the kids can't remember all the ancient relatives' names. You know, the long story short is, I'm gonna upload those. You can upload those all into basically an AI. And the other thing is it can actually, once you train it with your voice, it actually can speak like you. And by the way, it can speak in any language, too. I mean, you could do this right now. You could speak in any language over video, And even your lips will move to look like you're speaking Chinese.
And it can respond to questions.
And it can respond to questions. So I'm saying this living archive of my mother, who's 95 now, who probably will pass away, could live on. Now, is that a bad thing or a good thing? I mean, in my opinion, I would love my grandkids to be able to ask their great-grandma, like, what her mom was like, or what it was like living in, when she grew up in this little farm town, Hugo, in Minnesota, And I think that's sweet and cool, but maybe that's freak other people out. So I don't know. It's going to be a real weird kind of time when we.
It's a generational thing.
It
You
could
think
be a
about,
generational thing.
20-year-olds falling in love and one dies, and so they live the rest of their life with
it's,
AI.
We're entering things, but I would just say stay open as much as you can to this. I know it's hard, but I would say stay open. We've been through these before in America and in world history too. It will cause change and disruption, but I think in many respects it'll bring a lot of positive things. And ultimately, try to have faith that we will figure this out.
Thank you. I'm an optimist too.
There you go. Anyhow, nice to see you. Have a great conference. This sounds like a great group.
Thank you, sir. Did you say that? That's yours.